So welcome to those that are here live, and hello to folks that might be watching this later in our online version on the BirdsafeKC website. This is the volunteer training, so folks can get some background before they do surveys on this project. Tonight, myself, Dana Ripper, and Teresa Enderly are here. Our third project coordinator is Hannah McFarland. She's not able to be with us tonight, but I do have some notes from her. And all three of us will be people that, if you have questions, you would email all of us about anything regarding the surveys or the project. So we'll go ahead. This project is under the umbrella of the Missouri River Bird Observatory. Our mission is the conservation of birds and their habitats via science, education, and advocacy. You can see all kinds of information at mrbo.org. And the Bird Safe Kansas City project, we sort of classify it under our advocacy pillar, because basically the ultimate goal of the project is to change policy at the building level and ultimately at the city level. So we're kind of trying to encourage people to do things that they're not necessarily thinking of doing in order to save birds. But the window collision surveys that we're training on tonight kind of falls also under science, because it's data collection and it's done in a really standardized fashion. So quick outline, we're going to do some project background. We're going to talk a little bit about iNaturalist, which is the app that we use on mobile devices to collect data. We're going to talk about roots and buildings, and then go over briefly the contents and use of the Google Drive folder, which is where we put all of the data, where we do coordination in terms of like calendars and who's going to survey, and where just it's a treasure trove. There's the window schematics are in there, all kinds of things. So and then we will, of course, have time for discussion and question and answer. Okay, so some background. The scope of the problem of birds hitting windows is quite big in the scheme of direct mortality. So not indirect, not things like habitat loss or pesticides or anything like that, but direct mortality. Thing happens, bird dies. These are our top causes of that direct mortality. So cats, 2.6 billion. We can talk about that later if folks want to, but window collisions are second. So approximately 620 million birds per year are killed in North America by colliding in windows. And that's these are huge numbers. So these are taking major tolls on our bird populations. So anything that we can do to reduce bird collisions with windows, which is a relatively simple problem to address relative to things like climate change or habitat loss. It's a very cause and effect A to B situation. So we want to do this, and a lot of people are working on this across North America and the world. So a little bit deeper into those stats, we got about 600 million that are killed annually by building collisions. Here's the breakdown of that. So 56% at low rises, so structures less than 5 stories in height, 44% at residences. So this is something that homeowners can do a lot about as well, which is a really good thing to talk to people about. And then less than 1% at high-rise buildings. Those are often thought of as the worst perpetrators of bird collisions, but it turns out that just by matter of that there are a lot less high rises, skyscrapers, than there are low rises and residences, of course, across the country. That does account for less than 1% of direct mortality. However, we'll see one example of this. There are times when the events of mortality are catastrophic. There are lots of birds that will hit a high-rise building at one time, unfortunately. So we'll talk a little bit about window reflectivity or transparency and why birds really don't understand glass and why they try to fly through. Light is a big problem. Most of our bird species, particularly passerines, migrate at night. And so artificial light at night from cities, towns, residences, etc., is a big problem and is becoming a bigger problem as light pollution is more widespread. So it can cause migrating birds to become disoriented, you think it's a different time of day, or think that there's an oasis for them, and they will come down into built environments that are very dangerous for them. And so once they are down in the city or suburban or even rural built environment, a lot of the collisions that we see are while they are foraging early in the morning or throughout the day, and they are seeing reflections or vegetation through windows, and I'll show a couple pictures of that. But we often think of the mortality events as happening like during migration and during the night, and sometimes that does happen. But a lot of studies have shown that there is a great deal of mortality that happens bird by bird during the day. So a couple examples. This is the building down on the very south side of Kansas City at 104th and Holmes. And this is a glass walkway between a building and a parking garage, and you can see right through it, right? I mean, it looks as though you could potentially walk through that and get to the trees that are on the other side. And birds see this and they think they can fly to the trees that are on the other side. And an example also from the same area in South KC of an incredibly reflective building. So just to note that there do not appear to be very many cases of birds flying into reflections of clouds in sky. So it is not this entire side of the building that we would consider to be very collision prone. What would be very collision prone are the places that you see, the window columns that you see that are reflective of vegetation. So here's a few slides from our colleague Crystal at Johnson County Community College, who has been doing a really intensive study on the college campus since 2018. And so she's found problematic buildings throughout her campus, and here are the reasons that she has identified from her study. So they're not distinguishing the environment from the reflection of the environment. You can see a bunch of different reflective window situations here. They see a continuation of the environment through the glass. So again, feel that they can fly right through and get to the vegetation. And then in some cases, there are these architectural forms on buildings that kind of act like funnels or traps to birds. And so they will get trapped in these situations. I think the picture on the left is maybe the best example of that. You can see that this is recessed. There's reflectivity here, but birds also get confused by the angles of buildings and by kind of being funneled into a smaller space. So Kansas City is one of the most dangerous metropolitan areas in the country, as determined by a study out of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology a couple of years ago. This study looked at light pollution levels, the geography, so where these cities sit along major flyways, and then bird density during migration as measured by radar. And we'll probably talk a little bit about the radar tools that we use to sort of predict and track migration. But they took all of these, and you can see that in the spring, Kansas City is 7th worst, and in the fall, it's 8th worst. And that is true regardless of the size of the metropolitan area. So one positive, if you will, is that this issue is getting a lot more attention, partially thanks to studies like this one. And we're starting to see a lot of press on this issue. And I definitely would say that in comparison to a few years ago, we get the question or skepticism a lot less than we once did. Like, really, birds hit windows? I think most people now are pretty aware of the situation. So one thing to point out here, again, I don't love this CNN headline here: US skyscrapers kill 600 million birds per year. And, you know, even the picture reinforces that. And we saw from the data a couple slides ago that it's not really skyscrapers that are doing all of this. It's low rises and residences, and sometimes the taller buildings. So this is something that happened just over a week ago in Chicago that got a ton of press. You might have heard about this. This situation is of course, absolutely terrible, but it has spurned major public outcry and major outreach to the building in the city. And I'm pretty confident that this will result in serious action, leveraged largely by public opinion and by awareness of the topic. So all that in mind, the goals of this project, similar to other projects across the country, is we want to collect data showing the scope of the problem around Kansas City, identify problematic buildings, which we often hear of in anecdotal reports from bird watchers and master naturalists and just general public, like concerned citizens. We'll hear about buildings, and that has been the reason for us choosing the study sites that we have to date, and then identifying problematic portions of those buildings. So not every window is equally strike prone by any stretch. And that is a really good thing for many reasons. One, of course, for bird mortality, but another reason is that we will never get a building to treat all of its windows. That is simply cost prohibitive, if they were willing to work with us on that. So what we want to do is identify the windows that are most strike prone and hopefully work with people to either treat those, or maybe if they're going through a renovation, add bird friendly glass to the areas of the buildings that are most problematic. And then ultimately approach building owners and managers with strategies for reducing strikes. So window treatments, the inclusion of bird safe glass in building plans and retrofits, and then also lights out. So the purpose of our surveys is basically to document the problem and have hard data when we go to folks to try and offer working together on solutions. So this is a good example, and this is also from Crystal's study at JCCC. Not all windows are created equal. So same building, same window type, same window coating and inherent reflectivity on these windows. But you can see these are raw numbers of birds that struck each window. None over here whatsoever, a few here, 11 here, 2 here, and 3 here. And as it turns out, it's because this window that had 11 is in this particular season is perfectly reflecting this tree that's over here. And so birds think they can fly to that tree and they hit that window. Anecdotally speaking, the college ended up removing this tree for a totally different reason. It had to do with construction on campus, not because of bird strikes. But they had to cut down the tree and there were no further strikes on windows on this building. So how are we collecting these data? This is an entirely volunteer effort. So we simply ask that people conduct the surveys, the carcass searches as often as is feasible for them. The more, the better, of course. The survey seasons are spring migration and fall migration. And we have these wide windows, 1st of April, the 15th of June, and 1st of September to 15th of November, to try to encompass almost all of migration. You're going to have, early birds and late birds, late stragglers. But this is a really good window to capture the entirety of the season, with peak migration being about the 25th of April to the 25th of May and about the 15th of September to the 31st of October. So we have always asked our volunteers that if they have to choose a time when they would be able to dedicate the most surveys, we would be really grateful if they are in these peak migration windows, if it needs to be limited. You would walk a route or just a building according to a map, and we'll show some of those maps. And there's, of course, a list of routes and buildings to look at. Locate and document, and we'll talk about the documentation, dead or stunned birds. And use our schematics that we have to identify the window number and back that up with context pictures. And we'll give several examples of context pictures. Teresa, anything to add at this point?
Nope, we're good so far.
All right. So some challenges to know in advance, and this is just project wide. This is not specific to any route or building or person. So of course there are, whether it's private crews or the city's employees, there's always sidewalk sweeping and street sweeping that goes on. And so we are undercounting carcasses for certain. We know that. We don't know by how much, but it's certainly an undercount. Finding live birds obviously can be, it can be traumatic. We suggest that people either take the bird to Lakeside Nature Center for rehabilitation if possible, or if that is not possible for you, and for some people it's simply not going to be, trying to, if you can capture the bird, putting the bird into as safe a location as possible under shelter, if that is possible. And sometimes we have stunned birds that are just active enough that they'll sort of hop away and we don't really know their fate. We have permission to survey certain buildings, and that is made very clear in the Google Drive list of buildings so that everyone knows that and can easily access that information. And then there's a lot of buildings that we only survey on public sidewalks. So we bring this up as a challenge because sometimes we are challenged literally by people saying, hey, what are you doing? You know, they don't, it's, while awareness has risen certainly of bird collisions with buildings, it looks weird, right, to have someone out there like messing with a dead bird on a sidewalk in front of their building. I think the most typical reaction is people are like kind of weirded out by it and they don't want to be associated with it, right? So we do get asked questions. We tend to look at that as a potential outreach opportunity, and hopefully get a good conversation started with whoever's asking, whether it's a security guard or an employee in a building or maybe the building manager. But it's important to know, if you are on private property, that would only be the buildings for which we have permission explicitly from the owners or managers. Or if you're on a public sidewalk, you do have the right to be there, even if it makes them uncomfortable. So just keeping those things in mind. And then as far as like project-wide challenge, it's volunteer, and all of us, definitely including myself, can only survey on like an inconsistent basis. We can't be out there every single day. So in terms of the data, we are, again, undercounting and missing some things. But it's just important to keep in mind. So I'm going to just talk about the actual logistic details of surveying, but I want to make sure that folks know that this is something that is much easier done in real life than it is for me to describe it to you right now. Like it might, especially the iNaturalist data entry, it might sound complex, but it's more complex to talk about than to actually do. And certainly we'll have questions later. And also, we always make sure that if folks want someone along with them, a more experienced surveyor on survey the first time, that we make that possible. So the first thing to do is choose a route or a building. And right now we are surveying the routes downtown north and downtown south, and you'll see what that means. And Crown Center, out on Cliff Drive, the Polsinelli building in the West Plaza. And then right now we're only at one building that's at 104th and Holmes, but there's a suite of buildings down there that we like gain and lose permission to survey at, depending on who the property management company is at any given time. So right now we have one, we've had as many as 5, that just sort of fluctuates. So just an idea of where these are on the landscape. Up here we have downtown north, downtown south, Crown Center, Country Club Plaza is where the 1 building Polsinelli is, out over here at Cliff Drive, and then 104th and Holmes, of course, is south of this map. So here is an example of a route map. This is downtown north. It is easily the most complex of the routes. So there's a bit of meandering that's involved. That it's not, a full and easy circle to do. You kind of have to go down here and then go over there and then come back here and then J Dunn's over here. But all of these maps again are in the Google Drive folder, so you could pull them up on your mobile device while you're out there if you want. And we've found just that, once someone does a route a couple times in a season, then you'll just remember what buildings need to be surveyed. So that is an example of a map, a route map. This is an example of a building or window schematic. And this is 1101 Walnut on the downtown north route. So again, all of this data collection and the existence of window schematics, it is all focused on counting the strikes and determining which are the most struck windows. So when you find a bird, what you would do is you would back up and you would look up and you would see what window column the bird is under. So this is the south side of 1101 Walnut. And again, all of these window schematics are available to you. And then there's 14 columns. So basically, if I found a bird, I would step back a little bit and I would look up and I would literally just count. I'd be like, window column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, it's under the 7th column. And that would be the data point that would be collected there. Another example of schematics, this is at Hallmark Corporate in Crown Center. And you can see again, this is the north side of the building. And there are columns 1 through 18 here. When a carcass is found, we always fill out a carcass card and put that with the bird. And I'm going to show you some pictures of what that looks like. But basically, we have several different fail safes for data collection, if you will. This is the only part that's really written. The rest of it is just sort of entered on the app. But again, just for record keeping, and if people actually do collect carcasses, some people choose to do that. Some people choose not to do that. Either way is fine with us. The carcasses that are collected go to the Institute of Biodiversity at KU for further study. And if you do decide to collect carcasses, we can talk more about that at length, but the carcass card goes with the bird. Even if you do not want to collect, we still fill it out and take pictures with it, which I'll show you in just a second. Okay, so there we go. I will note that identifying dead birds as far as species is concerned is way more difficult than I anticipated. It's strangely very difficult. Even if a person has been bird watching for decades, a dead bird is just simply very different. Some of the field ID cues that we would use to help us identify the species of a live bird are simply not possible with one that is dead. So the point of me telling you that is just please take, the more the merrier on photographs of the bird. The better light, the better. We do ask that you take a ventral, dorsal, and lateral picture as shown here so that we can get each side of the bird. You can also see on the pictures on the bottom that as long as we have a picture with the carcass card, one picture as long as we have one picture with the bird and the carcass card, that is totally fine. We just need multiple pictures of the bird in general. So you don't have to put the carcass card with every single picture if you don't want to, or you can if you want to. We just need one with it. Context pictures. So these are just as important as the pictures of the actual bird. Again, for reasons of identifying the window in question where the bird hit. So if you look closely, and if you're on your phone, this might be a little too small to see, but right here is an orange cone. Right here is an orange cone. The second picture does not have one, which is why the surveyor is pointing to where the bird is. And in the case of the fourth picture, this person is standing where the bird is. So whether it's the orange cone, which you will be provided, or taking a picture with, you pointing at it, or you have someone with you and they can stand by it, we need to know where the bird is in relation to the building. Again, this is to make sure that we know exactly which window has been struck. In fact, in these 4 example pictures right here, I would say that the third picture right here is actually not a good context picture. There is not enough large scale detail. It's not backed up enough, if you will, that I would be able to tell which window that was. There are a lot of windows that look like that. So even backing up just maybe 10 or 15 feet from where whomever it was took this picture would be helpful so that we can see the entire context. Teresa, anything to add on context pictures?
No, I would just, I'm having trouble not reiterating that the point has to be where the bird is in relation to the building, but then we have to be able to tell what part of the building it is as well. You'll be writing that information on the carcass card, so that's good, but sometimes I just back up enough to maybe there's a parking sign or something that helps give some reference to where we are on the building for that picture.
There are some surveyors who take all of their pictures of the bird with the carcass card, context pictures, and they actually enter their data at home. Some people prefer to do it right there on the mobile app, and either way is fine with us. I have done it both ways, and I have noticed that if I take context pictures and take them home and look at the schematics at home, at least when I started doing that, I would be like, oh, I thought this was a great context picture. I thought it would be very easy to tell which window this was, but it's not a good context picture. So take as many as you think you will need to really identify the window. And we've had a number of occasions where when Hannah proofs the data, what she always does is she matches the window column on the carcass card with the window column that is entered in iNaturalist with the context picture. And so the better the context pictures are, the easier that job is to like double and triple check the data. Okay. Data entry. In iNaturalist, this project is called BirdsafeKC as the arm of the BirdSafe Kansas City project. And if you haven't used iNaturalist before, it's a really cool app for all kinds of things, and I highly recommend it for many, many things beyond this project. But I'm going to go through really quickly with a couple screenshots what it looks like to take an observation of a bird. All the pictures and data are submitted via this app, so you won't be like coming home and emailing pictures to me or Teresa or Hannah. It's all done via the app. As soon as this is over, we can talk about this at the end, but please send me your iNaturalist username. You need to be invited to the project. It's sort of a closed project, not just anyone can submit data to it. And then once you get the invite from me via iNaturalist, please accept that invite. Okay, so here's what it looks like. And we would note that this is going to look a tiny bit different, not significantly, but a tiny bit different on an iPhone versus an Android. I have an iPhone. Teresa has an Android. which is great because we know that it looks a tiny, tiny bit different, but also it doesn't matter, you know, what platform you use, one of us will be able to answer your question. So these are iPhone screenshots, just so you all know. So you would go to observe, you have found this bird that's on the right, you want to take all your data. So you're going to go ahead and hit observe, open your camera, get a picture of the bird. And then you're going to want to take more pictures of other things, right? More of the bird, context photos, etc. So you would add a picture here. You can take your context picture. You can see here the orange cone. The person is backed up enough that like you could go, if you know, if you wanted to, you could go and find this exact spot easily on this building, identifiable via schematics, etc. So we've added that schematic photo to this, and you can continue to take. I don't know if there's a limit anymore. iNaturalist used to actually limit the number of photos that you could take, but that has changed over time. It certainly allows us to take as many as we need for this project. So again, get one with the carcass card. You would then kind of turn the bird over and take a couple pictures so that we can make sure to be able to ID it. Then you can hit, what did you see? So this is the cool thing. And I apologize if folks are really familiar with iNaturalist, you will already know this fact, but one of the great things about using this app is that it's crowdsourced. So many other people help us ID birds. You might know the IDs in the field already, but a lot of times birds can be in conditions that make them impossible to ID ever. Sometimes they're just difficult IDs, and sometimes we have folks that don't necessarily, you know, are not necessarily birders to begin with, so they don't necessarily know bird ID, and that's totally fine, because this app helps us do that. So iNaturalist will give you some suggestions. You might say, okay, you know, I know that this is a sparrow of this genus. I'm going to go with that. You can select that. And then once you've done that, a very important part of this is to add it to the project, of course. So if you don't do this, none of us will ever see it. What happens when, and you can see here, I'm part of quite a lot of projects. If I wanted to add one to the Bird Strikes Kansas City project, I would turn that on. What happens when I turn it on is that it comes up with these customized data entry fields, and I can add my information to them. So in this example, I was at link 1, north side, window number 0.5, which I have seen from my schematics that are on my mobile device because of Google Drive. And again, you can do all this in the field just like this on your phone, or you can do it a different way when you get home. People have done both. Okay, and then of course you want to submit all of this when you are done. The other thing to do is just, and again, we're gonna go in the Google Drive briefly. It's something that you can obviously explore on your own, but we ask that you log your survey. So anytime you go out and do a survey, if you would please log it, even if, and I would almost say especially if, remember to log your survey and just say the time, there's a date on the one in Google Drive, of course, the route, if you found any carcasses, if you did the entire route, and if not, that's fine. Sometimes people run out of time or whatever. Please explain, i.e. which buildings you didn't do, or if you only did one of a whole route, please explain that. And then any incidentals, which are birds that are found sort of randomly. We'll talk about that really briefly. So basically at the end of the season, Hannah compiles all these data, and the measure that we end up with is how many carcasses per building were found on survey. And if we don't know that you surveyed, right? Say you found nothing and you were like, well, I don't need to log it, I didn't find anything. We won't know that you surveyed at all. And so if that happens a few times, that will really skew the data, right? So say there's a building that's been surveyed 10 times, On 2 of those occasions, a carcass was found, and the surveyor only told us about those. It'll look like there was 1 carcass found every time it was surveyed, whereas actually only 2 carcasses were found over the course of 10 surveys. So that part is really important. So incidentals are simply observations of carcasses at random buildings. And these are like, I'll give examples from real life. People will have a doctor's appointment and they happen to see a dead bird outside their doctor's office, and it's not a building that BirdsAfe Kansas City surveys, but you can still enter it anyway. And these are, really important pieces of data. We've actually added a few buildings over the years based on people entering random findings. So again, just buildings that aren't part of a route, or if you are in an area for a completely different reason, you are not on survey, you are not walking the route, and you happen to find a bird, that is also an incidental. So easiest way to remember it is just like, if you're not doing a survey and you're, not on a route for a survey, that's an incidental. And we have a way to enter that as well. You can see here, you can enter the building name, address. It won't, if it's an incidental from a building that is not on a BirdsafeKC route or list to survey, it won't have a window schematic, right? So you can just do something like 7 windows east of the front entrance. That would help us know where it was. And then the most important thing, of course, is putting yes in the incidental field. Okay, so here's myself and Teresa, and there's Hannah. I wanted to have her in here, even though she couldn't join us tonight. And she sent some notes when we knew she couldn't be here. So as the person that has the task of data wrangling, which can sometimes be a lot, and this is there's a lot of photos, there's windows, column numbers, there's all these different things that she needs to keep in order. And we've learned over the years that it can be easy for those things to get out of order and tough to reconcile everything. So I wanted to tell you all some notes direct from Data Central. Context photos are really important. The more the merrier. I know that I have said it, and then Teresa said it, and then it's coming from Hannah too. But if we can't tell what window a bird hit, like ultimately that data point is not going to be useful for the project, right? It's that important. So please use the schematics. And if you have questions, email Hannah. She's there to help. And the project fields, so those 4 fields in iNaturalist, are completed and match the schematics, and the survey log is complete. So the survey log is that little spreadsheet that you just saw, excuse me, where you put how many carcasses you found, even if it's 0. And that spreadsheet has been set up by Hannah to have drop-down menus. So instead of typing in downtown north, there's just a drop-down menu where you can select downtown north. The reason for that is if people start putting in various abbreviations for things, the data don't compile properly, and we have to go back through and manually change them. Okay. If you found a carcass while surveying a route, but at a building that is not listed on the route, note in the column regarding incidentals which carcass it was and where it was found. And that, again, we can look at that in the Google Drive folder. In the spreadsheet, it will say, did you find any incidentals? If you say yes, she's asking for a little bit more detail. And then if you happen to find a carcass at your house or at a random building, at your work, whatever, you're welcome to input it in both the survey log and iNaturalist as an incidental. So again, referring to incidentals. People often have a lot of questions about those, and that's fine. I mean, just I would advise to not really get hung up on it. Just if you're not on survey and not at a building that is one of our survey buildings, think of that as an incidental. You're welcome to enter it, as Hannah is saying here, into the survey log and into iNaturalist. Just let us know that it was an incidental and make that clear. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this when we were looking at, you know, public sidewalks versus places where we have permission to survey. But one really important thing to keep in mind all the time is that we are all ambassadors for this project, BirdSafe Kansas City, for the Missouri River Bird Observatory, for birds and bird conservation in general. And a lot of people on the project are master naturalists. So you're also an ambassador for your master naturalist chapter. Lots of important stuff. It can be very sad. It can be very upsetting. But, you know, ultimately, of course, we're trying to work with people to change minds and change their behavior. And so just keep that in mind all the time. I don't believe we've ever really had a problem with that. And I, you know, don't think anyone that's here tonight or watching on video would not be an ambassador and use diplomacy, but it's a good thing to remember, especially on a morning when, you know, you find a lot of bird carcasses. It's really easy to get upset. So this example here is just a win, if you will. There was a catastrophic migration strike incident, and Audubon in Texas actually really worked with the building owners. Nobody wanted that to happen again, or anything like it. And so they actually made really good progress with turning out the lights during migration. And it became, you know, something of a success story. So those things are totally possible. I think it's important to remember that while there might be people that certainly don't care as much as we do and maybe would you know, sort of weigh financial cost on a couple bird lives, and you know, if you're doing this project, that's probably not you, but no one really wants this to happen. Like, no one is like, oh, I'm going to put this building here and these windows here and this vegetation here for the express purpose of killing birds. So most people do not like this, that it's happening. So pardon me, I'm getting talked out. And we're at the end here. So thank you all for being here. And this is thanks to our partners as well. There's a picture of Crystal with a window treatment right there. A lot of dots that's on the Johnson County campus. And this project would not at all be possible without a lot of people working on it. So many thanks. Follow up, gonna need some iNaturalist usernames to get people hooked up with the project. I'm going to, I think, stop share and then just pull up the Google Drive folder really quickly. We can talk about meeting up for in-person trainings if needed, and getting the BirdsafeKC vests. We have official safety vests. That's really nice because it alerts people to what we're doing. And then the orange context cones. Any questions or anything to add or anything?
I have a couple of things I made notes about while you were presenting. One is we say windows, we want to know what window a lot, and we really, there I am. It's really a window column. It can often be difficult to tell specifically which window, but it is easier to tell which column of windows a bird is under. I think Hannah would ask that when you're on the carcass cards and in your survey, in the survey log, when you're entering in that spreadsheet, to use, it doesn't have to be your full first and last name, but use like your first name and a last initial, or a first initial and a last name, but not just initials, because then she has to remember and do a little detective work about who's made that entry. Master naturalists can count, you can count your survey time as master naturalist volunteer hours. So that's important to know. As far as live birds, I think the last time I remember us checking about this, Lakeside suggested that we call them first before just driving there with a bird. First of all, to be sure someone's there, and then sometimes, depending on what the condition of the bird is, they may suggest something other than bringing it to them. So I think they want to be called first. Does that sound familiar to you, Dana? Okay. And
Yes.
then it's carcass collection. We talked about if you're going to collect the birds, and we could talk more about that later. But on the INAT and the project in INAT, you can select whether you salvage the bird, which would be collecting it, in which case you have to keep it in a freezer until we can get it transferred where it's going to go. Leave in place, which I would suggest we only do if you can't actually get to the bird. Every once in a while you see one somewhere but can't physically get to it. What destroyed, I think, sounds rather dramatic, but sometimes we will, like throw it in a trash can or something. And then just moved. Sometimes you may just move it to under some shrubs or something so that another surveyor coming after you doesn't count the same bird again. So, yeah, those are my notes.
Thank you, Teresa. Which on the moved, that's a really important thing to do. If you can get to the bird and you are not collecting the bird, we would definitely ask that you move it if possible so that it is not double counted. There are a couple situations. One, the couple that come to mind are the patio on the former KC Star building. We cannot access it, and some of the lowered areas beyond railings at the T-Mobile Center cannot access them. It can be really confusing when you have people, especially during peak migration, when they're going out almost every morning, figuring out which birds have been counted before and which haven't. So if you can move it, please do. I'm going to pull up the Google folder, and much of what we have just said is in several documents in here. So there's always something to refer to, including things like taking birds to Lakeside, what it means to collect them versus move them. So here's this. This is the fall 2023 volunteer folder. And in it, you have background and protocol, and that has our permits, if you are ever asked for permits. It has carcass cards that you can print out at will. It has reports, more permits, all kinds of permits, route maps and window schematics. We looked at some of those. Here they are broken up by route or building. Right now we are not doing Ward Parkway, so please disregard for the moment, but you can see the others. Here is, for example, I tend towards downtown north because I do that one the most. So here is, as mentioned previously, this is an actual Google Map link, so you can pull it up and the buildings are marked. Here is the map that we looked at briefly, showing you the buildings, and then the schematics for each one. So I'll just pull Flash Cube here, and you can see, again, as Teresa just reiterated, it's the window columns that we're looking at. We have the building section, so the section is N1 or N2 or N3 or N4. The window columns are 1 through 10. And the reason for that is, yes, there's typically almost no way to tell in most situations if the bird hit the first floor, the second floor, the third floor. So we stopped trying to identify that and just said they hit somewhere on window column 1. Let's see. So let's go back to okay. Here's just a couple fact sheets that Teresa developed. BirdSafe Kansas City night and day fact sheets can be very useful just to have on hand if folks are interested. We've handed out quite a lot over the years. They're just simple one-pagers telling people about the situation. And let's see. This document here is simply the list of current routes and buildings that we are surveying and any notes that anyone needs to know. A lot of what we just spoke about during this meeting presentation is documented in this volunteer resources, volunteer contact information, pretty self-evident. Here is the calendar. This is really the full year, so you've got to scroll a little bit. But we do this because, of course, people sign up to do particular routes or buildings, and other surveyors will know that that's being covered that day. So I'm gonna scroll down. There was last spring. And here is September and going into October. So just a good way for everybody to know who's doing what and really what needs to be done. So for example, when I come to Kansas City, I'll kind of check and see like what hasn't been done in a while. And hopefully do that. Going back to here. Hopefully. There we go. I'm back in the folder to your view. Is that true? I'm back in the main folder. Okay. And then here, last thing is the famous survey log that we've just been talking quite a lot about. So you can see, I'll scroll down to the most recent. Okay, so you can see you want to enter date, approximate time. I mean, downtown North might take an hour or 45 minutes. So you don't have to write all of that, time to time, but just, when you started, your name, of course. And this is a drop-down menu as mentioned. So downtown North, number of carcasses found. Was the entire route done? Yes. If no, so actually this is a good example of one of us, probably Hannah, is probably going to have to ask Brett, what does the drive-through mean? Because what we really need to know right there is if an entire route wasn't done, what buildings weren't done. That is, from a data collection standpoint, that's the most important thing. And any incidentals. So here, and this is a good example of a good thing to do. Brett did downtown south. He found 3 carcasses. He did the entire route. He found 2 incidentals and where they were. So then Hannah knows which were the incidentals that aren't part of our normal routes. And then you can see here, zeros as well. Unfortunately, with migration being what it is right now, there's a lot of non-zero days out there. So anything else about that, Teresa, that I'm glossing over? Any questions about that from anyone on?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna stop share then. It took me longer to talk about it than to do most of the routes and the data entry. but hopefully that gave, some background. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, I think, and we can talk amongst ourselves about iNaturalist handles and things like that.